Hi, Jimmy. You are on the line. What would you like to talk about today?
Hey, Shannon. Hey, Paul. I was going to ask you guys if you've ever Googled brain cells slash universe and seen the images that come up when you look at that. Because when
I
when
didn't
you
hear the
type that
first part.
in,
I didn't
it's
hear
going
the
to give you
first
an
part.
image
Something.
of clusters of galaxies that resemble the neurons inside the brain. The clusters of galaxies spread throughout the universe.
What do you mean they resemble the
Have you ever
neurons
seen that?
inside the brain?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, I didn't hear the first part. You said Google something slash universe,
Soul
and
cell,
you said
brain cell.
brain cell. So if you Google brain cell and universe together, if you give Google that prompt, it's going to come up with something that's an amalgam, just algorithmically. So that's kind of confirmation bias in your results already. But I don't actually think, aside from like very superficially, that it would be in any way like, neurons in the brain.
Well, the implication would be that. And I'm not trying to argue that this is in fact the case, but it's just something
Mhm.
to consider that,
Uh-huh.
something in the way that neurons work, but for the clusters of galaxies are kind of like a fractal, a higher picture of the neurons that are maybe of the multiverse itself.
The
And, that
neurons.
we're inside some type of consciousness. And, because in religion, if we look at mysticism and mystics who undergo mystical experience, they kind of describe merging their consciousness with like a background consciousness, like the one that I'm trying to implicate here. And
Okay.
in Eastern philosophy, they call it non-duality. The Atman merges with Brahman, and they do describe it as this type of fusion in such a way that when you hear mystics often talk about the experience, it's one with everything. You often hear that bandied about. I'm sure.
Right. So,
And
that is a
yeah, go ahead.
platitude to me. That statement has no substance. Like, there's a lot in there that I would hold issue with. One is just saying in general that the universe in any way could be a neuronal system just belies a misunderstanding of neuronal systems because it doesn't function in the same way at all as a neuronal system. Like not even kind
Well,
of, not even kind of. I can
I
understand
don't.
how you would maybe look at the universe or even parts of the universe based on your Google search criteria and see something that maybe visually could map on like if you're really looking for it and you're trying hard enough, but nothing else functionally about it makes sense at all.
Well, yeah, I was just making a parallel there. I'm not saying that it would be exactly like
Doesn't that kind of feed
the
into your
neurons
next
inside the
point though? Because
brain.
you're saying like if I heard you correctly, you're saying that the universe is basically a big consciousness. Some of the evidence for that is that if you Google something about neurons in the universe, you can find pictures that make it sort of look like a neuronal system. And therefore, it makes sense that people who have spiritual experiences say that they're one with the universe because they're already an existing part of that neuronal system that is the universe's consciousness that I'm referencing. Those seem to be the points to your argument. Am I wrong about that?
No, that's yeah, it's pretty much what I've said. And the cosmic consciousness aside, people do describe the experiences in such a way that if you were to consider, like I said, I'm not trying to argue it is the case that the
Yeah.
universe itself is conscious. But when people describe these experiences, it's as though if you had considered it conscious, that the consciousness that everyone seems to be describing is a fusion with that ultimate cosmic consciousness.
What does that
But
mean though?
people.
Like that's it. That's such a platitude. So when somebody says they feel as though they're one with the universe, what does that mean like quantitatively? Even qualitatively. Like
Well,
what does that mean?
I
Does that mean that they feel like a
and
sense
even
of satisfaction? Does that feel do they can they be one with my mind? Are they one with inanimate things? Are they
well, what
aware
I
of
think it means. I think I've spoken to you once before on one show I called then talking about original sin, and I did want to get
okay.
into that, but I think that what it means in Eastern philosophy, I really like this notion they have of non-duality, which means that they are. there is a complete dissolution of the subject-object dichotomy in such a way that the boundary between you and the rest of reality completely dissolves. And so there's a perception there that finds no distinction between, the inner and exterior world. They
Yeah,
fuse
I
into
do that
one.
every time I go to sleep, though. Like, it's silly to me. Like, every time I go to sleep, there's a boundary between the exterior world and myself that dissolves, right? Every time I enter a REM state, that's a thing that happens. I have experiences that aren't on the realm of reality, but seem like they're real and that aren't influenced by my external stimuli. So say and that still just seems like a platitude to me because you're functionally saying that this person self-reports that they feel as though they're not themselves anymore, but are now part of something bigger. Now that could manifest itself in a multitude of different individual emotional states and cognitive states and mental states. None of them may even map onto each other. And then it's just self report. Like there's no way to really say what that looks like or what that even means. It's just a thing that people could very easily say to me to,
Well,
to reflect an
that might be the case,
experience that they're
but
having.
I would say the only difference is that when you fall asleep, it may be the case that this happens to you, but you won't remember it. Whereas
I
in these,
remember dreams all the
spiritual
time.
experiences, people can recall them.
People can recall dreams. People can remember
Well,
dreams.
yes, but I think dreams still operate within the subject-object duality in that you feel like you're an entity roaming in an environment. You don't see that, you don't
That's
see
not
those
necessarily true.
two as the unity. You still separate. You still perceive them as separate.
It's not necessarily true, and also it doesn't change the fact that what you're talking about, like this subject object duality, like there's no viable way for a person to demonstrate that that is the case. Like if they're becoming one with the universe in a fundamental way, that would have to mean that they were like everywhere simultaneously experiencing everything all at once. If they were one with the universe and you see the universe as some sort of conscious form. Which means that once somebody goes into that state, they're no longer just having their own experience. They would have to be having a multitude of other experiences that belong to other people along with their own. Otherwise, it's an empty statement. It's an entirely empty
No,
statement. Like, what are they experiencing? Like, they're not experiencing my experiences when that happens, and I'm a part of the universe. They're certainly not one with me. That's one data point demonstrating that's an inaccurate statement.
well, I think it's that, they don't, in that perception there, they don't identify with their own material body. They kind of see the entirety of the universe as their self, so in a way, they do see you included in that. They may not have your thoughts, your experiences, your memories, but you're
I
not
become them
something that's
momentarily?
totally
It's
separate.
like, that's a super, like, referential way to say that the universe is you're one with the universe is to say that, "Well, I am now the universe."
Jimmy, you keep saying they. Are these positions that you hold, or are you just trying to call in to explain things that you've heard other people say? Like, do you hold any of these positions that you're talking about?
Yeah,
Okay.
not necessarily the one I mentioned in the beginning, but I do adhere to like panpsychism, things like that, that are related.
You were just using the third person on this all the time, so I was worried that you were just hypothetically talking on behalf of others. So when you said they experience, you actually mean when you experience these things. So these are feelings that you have, and so
Well,
so we can
anyone
ask you
who
questions about them
undergoes
personally.
what I meant by day is I think anyone who undergoes something like a spiritual or mystical experience, that's what I meant by day.
So, you're speaking on behalf so you've never even had this experience. You've heard so this is 2nd, 3rd,
No,
4th
no,
hand
I've had
recounting of
it. I've had it. I just don't think it's an exclusive experience to myself. I think even you could have it. I don't think you have, but I think it's a potential that you could explore.
I can have all kinds of different cognitive states. I don't think that I would attribute them to the same thing that you do. I think that you can put yourself in a
Maybe not,
meditative state
maybe not. But
where you
I think it
can
would open your mind to other possibilities.
I
Nevertheless,
mean, my mind's pretty open. It may not seem like it because I don't agree with you, but that doesn't mean I'm not open-minded.
Question
um,
is,
what exactly is there to disagree with? I mean, I wasn't trying to make the point that the universe isn't that conscious. Which
So
point
you
did you
called
disagree
to
with?
say then what did you call for? I'm
Yeah.
curious. So you don't think the universe is itself conscious, right? You don't think that?
Could you repeat that one more time? I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
So what did you call for then? So you don't think the universe is conscious. You didn't call for that. You called to talk about it even
No,
though
not
it's not what you
necessarily.
think?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, okay, you've heard of. I think I've mentioned this to you before when you're on non sequitur once, but we're talking about the
A
original
long
sin,
time.
and I said, if you consider the mystic who enters the contemplative state where they perceive everything as one, then as long as the only way the sin comes in, I called it the original division because if you perceive yourself separate from someone else, then that gives you permission to commit sin. You could steal from them, you could murder them, you could rape them. But if you see everything as one, then that sin doesn't come to play. That when you don't have that division and you see all as one, then you have love and unity in that regard, and sin doesn't play a role.
What if I wanna hurt myself? What then? What if I see everything as one and I wanna hurt myself? What if I'm self-destructive? Then what?
Well, what do you mean by hurt yourself?
Well, if you're saying that sin comes in because we see ourselves as separate, which I'm assuming you're attempting to make an argument that that means that we can disassociate ourselves from other people because and feel as though what we do to them doesn't affect us, so we don't have to care. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah,
That
and
if we see
I
ourselves
thought I
all
heard
as
yourself.
one.
Maybe you were talking about
Yeah, but if we see ourselves,
suicide.
so okay, so I'm hearing that then. That's right. So that means it would follow then that if we see ourselves all as one, what you're saying is intuitively, that would mean that we wouldn't our sense of self-preservation would kick in, and we wouldn't harm other people because we would see them as an extension of ourselves. So selfishly, if we have that perspective and really ardently believe it, we wouldn't do bad things to other people because it would be like doing it to ourselves, right?
Precisely. Yeah, no, that's correct. That's
What
correct.
if I'm self-destructive? Like, what if I wanna harm myself? That doesn't exist. That
Well,
just
I mean,
blows up the
that wouldn't
paradigm.
come into play though.
Why? I would just be intrinsically happy, just definitionally, if I hold your beliefs. Like, it would
Yeah,
just
well,
augment
it's
my
not
mental
necessarily
state such
something
that
that I don't think it's necessarily something you arrive by belief. It's a direct experience.
I directly experience that I'm one with everyone else in the universe and every other thing in the universe, which is its self-consciousness. Direct experience would tell me that.
Yes, I think that's what a mystical
How?
experience
How
involves.
does direct
I don't think
experience tell me that?
I don't think it's
How?
permanent, but I think it's a temporary phenomenon.
How does direct experience tell me that? You said direct experience will tell me that. So, how? Describe how direct experience tells me that me and Paul and you are the same thing and that the
Well,
universe
what I
itself is
mean,
also us and we are it.
I think that's what a mystical experience implies. When you undergo this phenomenon, it's not as though
No,
that perception stays permanently there. It's something you glimpse temporarily, but when you
you're
return
saying
to
that
the
I can
baseline
just
of
come to that
consciousness,
intuitively through direct experience, but now you're shifting the bar. You're saying, "Well, you have to have this very special kind of mystical experience," which you yourself just told me not that long ago that you don't think I have had. So that I've not had a direct experience, which is you're telling me direct experience is how I would know, and now you're shifting the bar and
yeah.
saying you need to have this specific type of mystical experience, which you yourself said that I didn't have. So that seems to
Well, no,
negate
well,
your position.
that's not to say that you can't have one. It's just simply that you haven't had one yet,
So a certain
and
subset of people who have had a very
it
special
may
kind of
happen.
experience believe this thing. Therefore, I should.
No, no. I mean, you could come to your own conclusions about it, but I think you should, before you do, I
Mhm.
think have the phenomenon first and then decide on how you want to interpret it.
Why would I like?
So
You're telling me that I need to go ahead, Paul. Go ahead. I'm talking.
you're pitching an interpretation for an experience we haven't had. So that's fine. I have had lots of experiences that I think were spiritual. But here's the thing. Does this mystical experience you're talking about give us any new information or lead to any different conclusion than where Shannon and I are merely operating in a world where we are empathetic? We have empathy for people because we know how we would like to be treated and what might be good for us. And so we can imagine ourselves in that situation and treat people with general empathy, right? And that's a social species, not environmental, evolutionary trait, right? So, what does the mystical experience bring to the table that we need that isn't already explained with empathy?
Okay, I've heard this, and I've heard it like, I've heard atheists quote things like, "Well, I'm good without God," and I think the difference
Hmm.
between that and mystics who undergo this phenomenon is what they glimpse, and I've had it myself. is what in Christianity it's referred to as agape, meaning infinite unconditional love. This is beyond
Don't,
general
no, no, no,
empathy for
but
other people.
okay, but
And
describe that
so,
then. Describe the difference between maximal empathy and agape.
okay, I
What's
think,
the gap?
with empathy, I think you're right that generally, people will look out for one another. They'll make sure, maybe not every single person. Maybe there's some people who are psychotic that might lack that, but by and large, most people have that general empathy. But where the mystic differs is that the heightened sense of this,
No,
which
no, no.
the reason they call it
It's,
agape, it's
can't more of empathy isn't. I'm talking about what's the difference between your agape and the most empathetic person that you can even imagine that can still be attributed to empathy. What's the gap? And you can't just say, well, it's a little bit more
well, okay.
because that's not a difference.
I guess it depends on what you mean by maximally empathetic, because I would say when you're talking about maximal empathy, then at that point you are talking about the mystic. I think that's as
So there's no
maximum with,
difference.
yeah, as empathetic as you can get.
Yeah. So
No, it's
there's
just Mystic
literally
is
no.
flagging it.
So the mystic brings literally nothing to the table that we can't
Well,
we,
I don't
we
know how
can't
you would
figure out
have
with
that
maximal empathy.
maximal empathy without it. I've never witnessed such a person. I think
Yeah,
by and
and
large, most people
I've
are
you know
generally
what?
empathetic.
I know a lot of mystic people who are entirely unempathetic. So I know a lot of people who describe experiences like you have who are the selfish buggers. So you're coming to the table and saying if people have this experience are aware of something that I'm not, but yet you just admitted that there's literally nothing to explain that I couldn't extrapolate
Well,
from empathy.
wait, I mean, if I met someone who claimed to have mystic insight, and it's such the type I'm talking about, and they were, selfish pricks, I would be skeptical on whether they really had it or not. Doubt that's just me. But I mean, if you buy that they have mystic insight and yet they're assholes, that doesn't mesh in my mind. That doesn't
But
make sense.
you've
It
admitted to
doesn't
me that
follow.
there's nothing. This mystic thing doesn't bring anything. You're saying, oh, it's one way to achieve a maximum empathy. Okay, cool, but there's not actually knowledge there. There's no actual information in this mystic experience. It's just a way for you
Well,
to
I think
get.
what it is, like, for instance, I believe his name's Ramana Maharshi. Someone asked him, how should we treat other people? And his response was to say, from this mystic insight, there are no others. The implication that all is one,
Yeah,
you shouldn't,
that's
well, yeah, basically the point I was trying to say. And I think that's the insight of the mystic. Sure, maybe someone could be highly empathetic without this insight, but I think, you know, perhaps they don't need it anyway. If you can exhibit that in your personality and your attitude all the time, then you're pretty much on the level of mystic anyway.
'Cause it always makes me crazy when people just say, well, if you can come to the insights I'm saying you can only come to by experiencing or believing in my religion and having the experiences that I'm talking about. If you can come to those without it, then that just means that you're my religion anyway then. You're just borrowing from my religion for your worldview. I've heard that so many times.
that's
Well,
That's kind of an insulting thing to
I
say though,
don't
Jimmy.
believe in one particular religion. I adhere to the print of philosophy that says
Your spiritual
this mystic
perspective then,
insight.
whatever. My spiritual
Yeah,
journey, my
yeah, I've
spiritual
spoken to you
perspective,
before. Yeah.
whatever you would call it for yourself. So, but I'm just want to make sure that you're clear on what Paul was saying. So Paul was saying that we do not in any way need what you're describing to have like a good society. There's a way we can think our way to that using like reason and intuitive empathy. And you're saying, well, that just means that you are a mystic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think mystics
Even though
are
you do
exclusive to any single
nothing a
religion.
mythic just you're not nothing that that a mythic does. You don't believe anything that a mythic believes. You question everything a mythic says, and you use a completely different path entirely. That somehow makes
No,
him a
no.
mythic.
Well, I would classify people like Christ, if he did it. I know some people don't believe that he existed, but if he did, he's definitely a mystic. Siddhartha Gautama, the founder of Buddhism, mystic for sure,
So you're just
Muhammad.
saying anybody that
You know,
you
the
see as a good person, you're just gonna stick a flag in them and go,
They're
"Mystic!"
just my tribe. And
Anybody
the
I
people
think is
who
good, oh, mystic.
the people who
I don't
advocate
think
the
I
same
don't think I'm
ideas I
necessarily
advocate, but I
doing
don't
that.
like how they behave.
I don't think that's the case.
That's what you just
But you
I
admitted
don't
that
that's what you're
people can
saying,
have the
though.
same you said that people have the same experiences as you, which is what defines a mystic, and don't behave the way you think that they should as a result, aren't a mystic. So you
Well,
are just collecting people whose
I've never.
behavior you like.
That was your claim.
You
I've
calling
never
them
personally
mystic?
met someone like that. Because like, I would, if you want to refer to me to someone like that, then I would love to speak to them. I would love to pick their mind and see what's going on to wonder why that is, because I've never met someone like that. And I don't think I'm really putting a flag down and saying this person's a mystic. I think what defines a mystic is their mystical experience. I believe Gautama had it in the form of what he calls nirvana, which is just another name of what the Christian mystic might call the direct revelation of the Holy Spirit.
Okay,
You know,
so you're we need to go back then. So do you disagree with Paul then? That
yeah, I disagree with Paul.
okay, but at the end of your conversation with Paul, when he walked you towards the end of that dialogue, you said, "Well, if that were the case, that person would just be a mystic," right?
Well, no, I said they would be on the level of a mystic without necessarily being one. I think what defines a mystic is their mystical experience, and if someone exhibits that type of morality without having undergone mystical experience at all, then they're maybe. I believe this is the
And
case with
you
maybe
would see
Martin
them
Luther
as
King.
just as good
Martin Luther
as
King, I don't think Martin Luther King had these experiences, but he was a highly empathetic individual.
Mhm.
I think he's a great example of what Paul's talking about.
Okay, so you're listing off people who aren't mystics and saying that they did good stuff. So I guess we're on the same team that like mysticism is unnecessary. And you also said that
Well, I mean,
you've never even met
I
anybody
would.
in your life that would be the type of person that you're talking about. That
I don't think it's
even people who
unnecessary.
have self-described having mystical experiences wouldn't be that type of person. So it seems as though that like you're looking for some sort of unicorn that doesn't even really exist, but seems to you like it's a really cool, neat idea.
Well, no, I think mystical experiences they can be concretely defined, and even in neuroscience, that's why they're studied. That with the like things like psilocybin induced mystical experience, which I've spoken to you about before on
Yeah.
another episode, I think. So I think it's relevant in that regard, and it's being studied by neuroscience. I think studying this type of phenomenon will give us better insight into the nature of consciousness and the hard problem which Paul rejects. I think it'll answer questions in that type of thinking of, whether you're thinking about the hard problem or,
Or what
or
does
whether
purple
classical
smell like? We'll
mechanics,
solve that one too.
just, appreciate it.
All right. See you later. Thanks, Jimmy. Bye. I wonder if he actually heard what you were saying. It's so funny. It seemed like there was like a power shift. Maybe I'm maybe I maybe I'm the problem. Oh, we have
I mean, that is a
calling
way
in.
a lot of us are in conversations that we have our own, that we're thinking about what we want to say next. And
The next. Yeah.
anyway.
No, true. Totally true.